Hi, I'm Brennan. Welcome to Manager Mailbag. We're answering real questions submitted by managers to help you deal with your greatest challenges. We're gonna solve these things together. Okay, so the first question is, what do you do if you don't have the ability to reward great employees meaningfully? IamOscar.com says, managers need to be able to reward great employees in a way that's meaningful. An extra break, a pizza, or a star on the bulletin board is not meaningful. I actively encourage my best employees to seek better employment in companies that will pay them a more appreciative wage. I think what we're talking about here is motivating employees and not necessarily just rewarding them. And so the first step there for me is to think about motivation and how it works with humans. In my experience, people don't always just want more money. I think that's a cheap way or lazy way of rewarding people. Often in startup land, you get someone who is making, in some cases, $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 a year, come and join a startup and are willing to work for $90K a year, right? Why? Well, they clearly aren't motivated by making $650,000, $100,000 a year. They're more motivated by showing up to a small company, having bigger outsized impact, proving to their peers that they can take everything they've learned in their careers and build something more massive, have more equity, more ownership, more impact on the environment that they operate within. If you're hiring people who are only motivated by money, and in your organization, you cannot give them more money, you're bad at hiring. You should look for people who are not explicitly only motivated by money. You should look for people who will thrive in this environment so you can train up a team of people who will be excited to show up for work for the things that your work offers. Even if you look at some of the reports that we've published, people rarely leave for money once they've been paid fairly. Usually they leave in anticipation of more growth. They think they can get more growth elsewhere. That growth might come in the form of money, it might come in the form of something else. So I think the broader question is, what types of rewards motivate people beyond just cash? There are three key ways of motivating those people. So you've got reward of the self, reward of the tribe, and reward of the hunt. Typically giving them cash, right? Which I think some of what we're talking about here, telling them to leave for more money, is more in the reward of the hunt. So I won't focus on that too much because I think you kind of get that one. Reward of the self is more about mastery. How do you become really, really good at your job? How do you become a really, really good version of that person you think you are? Often this comes out with members of your team when you look at maybe someone who achieves inbox zero every single day, or someone who makes sure that their task list is empty before they leave for work. Those are the types of people who are achieving mastery for themselves. We have tapped into that ourselves by creating a little growth framework, which takes the concept of going from a senior engineer to a staff engineer, or a junior engineer to an intermediate engineer, and breaks it away from like a 2-year journey into achievable 90-day milestones that you can kind of inch your way up. Or if you're in an environment where maybe you don't have control over the exact promotion, maybe there's a specific way to get this title, you can invent the micro steps that get you there, right? Like you can reverse engineer what a person has to do in order to get that. What would it take to prove to me, the manager, that you've earned all of those badges and I get to go to bat for you and kind of fight on your behalf for that promotion? I think it's about meaningful progression. It's about the anticipation of achieving that next level. And I think you just have to make sure that there actually is benefit, right? Like at some point, the benefit should be an actual tier change within your organization. And so if you've done all of the things necessary, you've got to be able to deliver on the other end of that. But there's no reason why you can't invent the micro steps. The micro steps might just not mean more money. The last one, reward of the tribe, is more about social recognition, social rewards. I think tools like Twitter and Instagram have really hacked into this type of thing by making sure that their follower accounts and like counts and retweet counts are very visible, so that you really know if you're getting that virtue social signaling from your peers. The way I think you can really push this deeper and deeper is by letting the tribe, in a way, reward the tribe. So giving away some of that authoritative control to the group. We've taken this concept internally of Employee of the Month and brought it into something that's a little bit more in control of the team. So once a month, we give away what we call the Narwhal Award. And the last Narwhal who's previously got it gets to pick the next Narwhal by whatever criteria they want. It's a really hard reward to get. There's only 12 given out a year, and you have to work really hard to kind of cross some of those silos at work to get that recognition. I think there's a lot of ways you can bring in the rewards of self, the rewards of the tribe, the rewards of the hunt into your day-to-day work environment. And the last tip that I'll give you for something like that is just knowing that the variableness of the reward matters. It's not that if you do this, you always get this reward. It's really the anticipation of the reward that matters. So anyways, that's some of the ways I would break it down if you're thinking about how do you meaningfully reward people outside of cash. And if your work offers absolutely nothing other than very, very low income, just get a new job. It's a terrible place. M. Jeskinski, hope I'm saying that right, asks, what do you do when you're asked to enforce a policy you don't agree with? One example was use of PTO at my old job. We had general vacation time, which we could use for anything. Sick time, that only required you to say, I'm sick and won't be in today. And a weird personal time category for random stuff that needed to be done during business hours, and it required a justification. The example HR gave were unexpected childcare issues, transportation issues, or banking personal appointments. I had a direct report who was childless but highly involved with her nieces and nephews' lives. She wanted to use personal time once just to watch her sister's kids when her sister's childcare fell through. I initially told her that sounded like personal time and would apply, but our director in HR made a big deal out of it and told me to tell her that it could only be used for vacation time. In general, the company was very family friendly, and I was really disappointed I had to enforce a policy that someone's own children are the only family that mattered. Recently, we just saw the news just went a little wild over Apple's director of AI resigning in protest over the return to work policy. Completely disagreed with it, didn't want to take it to the team, didn't want to enforce it with the team, and said, that's it, I'm out of here. You can have someone else enforce your crazy, wacky policies. That one act of protest didn't change the policy, but it caused a media stir, and that media stir and then subsequent uprising did change the policy. Probably shouldn't do that. It's pretty extreme. It's actually more often than I've been on the other end. I've been like the bad person than the manager in this situation. So to put myself in the shoes of the HR and director who are kind of making your life miserable here, like here's why I've accidentally made other people's lives miserable in this situation. Typically, I actually don't want policies. As like CEO, founder of the company, my policy I want is everyone to be responsible, reasonable adults and just make good decisions. And that's like the ultimate policy I want. Unfortunately, things come in and policies have to be put in place, and I kind of reluctantly agree to them. However, I think the policy is kind of failing in two ways here. So if I'm reflecting on the policy that you've communicated to us, I think the idea of the policy is to make them not subjective, make them a little bit more objective, and to make them very, very clear. They should allow the organization to scale decision making, right? So instead of every single time someone wants a day off, they have to go through me, the policy should help them deal with that on their own. It obviously failed in scaling decision making, right? Like you made the decision, you communicated to your team, they then caught wind of it, they made a different decision, they had to communicate that to you, they had to communicate to the team. It's highly inefficient. But if we look at like why did the director and why did HR get involved, I think it's probably one of two things. One is that policy is still under iteration and still needs work, and it's not perfect and they know that. So they're trying to fix gaps as they see them. That might just not be clear. You might be used to, or they might have communicated that it's set, and it might be a little bit still unset. The second thing that might have caused alarm bells all over the place is that it's setting a precedent. They don't want this to set a precedent that the policy now says you can take time off work to hang out with your friends and family. That's considered personal time. And that might be really alarming to someone in HR and really alarming to a director, because this one high performer on your team, totally fine. You know the situation, you know but other people don't. And so they might catch wind of that and say, oh, I can hang out with my nieces and nephew whenever I want, and that doesn't count as personal, or that doesn't count as vacation time. Great. That doesn't necessarily make your situation any easier or any better, but that's just maybe some understanding of why they did that. So I'll break up the couple things that you can do into 3 categories. So one is like, what do you do in that meeting you have with your director and HR person? The second is, what do you do to that team member after that meeting? And the third is, what do you do when this whole situation is done and you still disagree with the policy going forward? So in that meeting, it's totally okay to make your stance known. You can go in with your director and HR and say, I disagree with the decision you guys are making here. They might completely disagree with you, might have a little bit of debate, that's okay. But it's okay to make your stance known on that. What's important is that when you leave that room, you're committed to whatever decision was made in there. So disagree, sure, but commit. Once you leave that room, the decision that was made in the room is the decision that you are also upholding. In a situation like this, if you've already communicated to a person that it's personal time and they're trying to revoke that, I will say you can probably in that room ask for an exception. If you can get away with them not undermining your authority to that team member, that might be worth it. Like I said, after the meeting, you're going to talk to this person. You have to communicate whatever decision was made. Basically, your only other option is to resign in protest of the decision that was made, right? That's A and B. But after that situation is over, I think a lot of people just get like demotivated and move on. I would say as a manager, you have one next thing you can do, which is changing that policy going forward. You might not be able to change the policy in that limited amount of time that you have between when your team member has to actually look after their niece and nephew. But going forward, you can still disagree with that policy, enforce it, and then try to enact change. And I think you can improve it in a couple ways. So one is that the definition of personal time is really subjective. I would work to make it more objective so that it's uniform across the company. Most importantly, at a company seemingly like the one you're describing, it didn't seem to align with the values of the company, right? Like you mentioned that this is a very family-oriented, family-friendly business, and yet when a family situation came up, you're now punishing someone who maybe doesn't have kids of their own, where you wouldn't punish someone who did have kids of their own. So I would say this is a really good example of leading with values and starting with culture and bringing that to someone who can affect change on policies. If a manager of mine came to me with a letter that basically said, I don't really care about the policies, I care about the culture and the values that we have here as a business, and here's a situation that I feel like we didn't uphold our values because a policy got in the way of it. I would not only read it, but I would probably action it, and that might be something, maybe it takes 6 months, but that might be something that you do so that going forward, you're not in this kind of crappy situation of enforcing this crappy policy. Upset Top said, feeling that you don't have enough support from your own manager to be a better manager. Stone City 13 says, as I'm not getting any staff soon, my manager suggested I stop doing my weekly one-on-one with my guys, and it also reduce some catch-up calls we have so we have more time to work. I said no, as they're effective, but I'll never forget that request now. Terrible management. To which Good Throwaway added, being understaffed and not getting support from my management is really the worst. I agree, Good Throwaway, and I also agree, Stone City 13, and Upset Top, I'm upset too, and you're the top of the Reddit thread. Here's the thing. What was the question again? Most managers actually don't know how to be a good manager, right? They've received no training for it, just as you've received no training for it. So by all measures, most people are just figuring it out as they go through trial and error. I'll just add, as a CEO, it gets worse the higher up you go. So a lot of it is, what can you do? What's within your control to become a better manager? You're not just this bottle floating in the ocean. You are almost by definition someone who is a force in the world. You are the one who makes decisions for other people. You're the one who causes change to happen. Part of being tapped on the shoulder and saying, hey, I think you're ready for management, is that you probably are self-reflective. You probably are able to coach yourself and learn things yourself. So I would take a stroll through like your Kindle library or your book club, or we have a new manager gift guide, and check out some of the books. They're going to teach you some of the most battle-hardened truths of management, and you can learn from managers who have taken the time to write an entire book. 100% have one-on-ones with your team. Arguably, our data suggests having them weekly for 30 minutes. If anyone pushes back on you for that, Just point them to our report, statistically very highly correlated with a high performing team. So I would think about setting up peer one-on-ones, right? Like for you as a manager, peer one-on-one is going to be helpful for a couple reasons. One is it's going to give you vantage points to the different parts of the organization that you otherwise wouldn't have. But it will also, just by nature of them being your peers, give you tips on how to get more done and succeed better at that organization. If your peer has the same manager as you might be able to understand better how to approach that manager in a way that's effective. If the peer has a different function, you may better understand what your boss's goals are and what their constraints are so that you can kind of operate with them a little bit better. I would think about having a skip level one-on-one if you can set up a quarterly with your boss's boss. This isn't like a form of back channel around, but it's more about understanding the higher level strategies. However, one of your biggest sources, I would say, is going to be that one-on-one with your boss. So I would approach it very differently. Think about it more as this is your opportunity to manage up and then increase the ability for you guys to give feedback to each other, especially if this manager's and you are not on the same page. So on managing up on a one-on-one, we have a great template. So just start there. I would say if you have limited time with your manager, then your immediate goal, and you want more time, your immediate goal is to demonstrate to the manager that you're not going to waste their time. You're going to want to make sure you demonstrate that you are taking it seriously, that you're putting the effort into it, and you're getting a lot out of it. If you do get time, send the agenda of what you're going to cover in advance. When you show up to the meeting, I think you're going to want to anticipate what they need, give them the information that they need quickly, and dig into some things that will really help you. And at the end of the meeting, if it did help you, I think you're going to want to communicate that that was really valuable, really helpful, and that you're now able to do your job better as a result of it. If you're not getting support from your manager, I would spend a lot of time on goals in a way that allows you to carve out a ton of autonomy. Just make sure that that's crystal clear, that your key results, your OKRs, whatever it is, are indisputable. So if you leave for 90 days and come back accomplishing everything, they're like, great job. The number one thing I would say, and this is probably counterintuitive, is to actually just build a peer network of people who are in similar role, similar stage in career, similar industry, and try to meet with them monthly and almost like complain about your issues to each other. The nice thing about them not being at the same company is you get really interesting cross-pollination of ideas, of issues. You build a little bit of a network. That network plus 20 years, plus 30 years, is probably going to be the most valuable thing you'll have in your life. And I'm so surprised at how valuable mine is. I have a CEO network. Some of those CEOs have gone on to become, like those companies have gone on to become multiple billion-dollar companies, and the growth that person has seen has been amazing. But then there's other people who've sold their companies, other people who've gone through a whole bunch of different life experiences that we're able to kind of learn from, borrow from, and evolve from. It takes 10 years of management experience before you even get a single day of training. So the fact that you don't feel support, your boss probably also doesn't feel support, and their boss also probably doesn't feel support. It's a huge reason why actually we not only created this podcast, Manager Mailbag, is to start giving support to each other, right? To start teaching each other, sharing experiences, getting some of these best practices out there. That's also why we created our app. I would look for support in all directions and all avenues you possibly can. It's tough out there, so problem solved.